And all signs are pointing to a tropical depression or even a tropical storm forming. And we are breaking down each and every scenario with hurricane expert Dr. Rick Knabb, including where we could see watches needed along the Gulf Coast.
And one big uncertainty is how strong this system could get. We'll show you why a strong tropical storm or a hurricane is still very much on the table.
Plus, an even more significant concern right now is the heavy rain and dangerous flooding that could come with whatever this turns into. Find out who could see more than a foot of rain when the storm pushes inland.
Plus, we discuss how the potential tropical system compares to other recent flood events that have turned deadly and destructive, and why some communities could end up seeing scenes like this all over again. So this tropical entity we've been keeping our eyes on since it was really over the heartland last week, now into the Gulf of Mexico, and we expect better organization over those very warm waters. I'm Alex Wilson here with Mark Elliott. Pretty incredible how the models were on this thing last week.
It is not unheard of for that kind of spin from thunderstorms to turn into a tropical system. It is kind of unheard of for that to be happening a week, almost a week and a half when all is said and done, that the model saw that happening, and it's still working out that way. So we're breaking down every angle of Invest 92L this hour on Weather Underground, looking more and more likely to be our next named storm system in the Atlantic Basin. And if you want the proof that this is getting better organized, how about the thunderstorms and the water spouts that formed today? Several of them captured on different videos, some cameras. This happened to be off of St. George Island in Florida. A weather stem camera caught this one. You got the kind of each click, and you saw the water spout go right on by, and then the wall of rain shows up. Magnificent there, spinning across the water this afternoon. And also, we had some big-time rains in Pensacola with wind and downpour rains this afternoon, sent everybody scurrying inside. Alex, I think it's important to note that this is not the, the kind of Florida Keys water spout, the bottom up, kind of sit there forever. Those were tornadoes that just happened to be over water.
Yeah, that thing was moving. Pretty incredible. Right place, right time for that camera and water spout. Obviously, Gulf Coast cities, they're on alert tonight. We're going to be breaking down throughout the show. Even communities not along the coast, even inland areas need to be watching this tropical development as it threatens to become perhaps a flooding issue into those inland communities. You can take a look at rainfall still to come. Some of those forecast models honing in on parts of Louisiana and Mississippi, which could be seeing some significant and serious rainfall, especially given what we've seen over the last few weeks, even months across the Mississippi River Basin. Early this week, or really right now, our disturbance is moving south and into those very warm Gulf of Mexico waters. We expect this to hang around the northern Gulf as we get into the middle and end part of the week, giving it time to obviously tap into that very warm water and perhaps get better organized and strengthened. Our deep tropical moisture will spread into the Gulf Coast, so even going into the next few days, we're already going to be on alert for the possibility of some flash flooding in some of those coastal areas. So expecting likely tropical development in the next 48 hours and our effects to begin late week and then continue into the weekend. Our area of concern, highest likelihood for this system to eventually move offshore would be between Texas, Louisiana, and the Mississippi coast. Mark, there's a lot we don't know, though.
That's right. We know a lot, but there's still some question marks, and those question marks bring some important details that we still have to iron out. Some of that goes into where this invest is going to move to next, including a potential landfall at some point. That is a big part of the story when it comes to a strong storm. If there's wind that you have to be worried about, if there's a storm surge, that location of the center point is still crucial. We know a lot of you focus on it. It's not the only factor. We know that there are others, including the heavy rain, that'll go no matter where these forecasts wind up. And again, don't just say, okay, I'm in Mississippi, so I'm fine, or I'm in Houston and I'm fine. These are forecasts with 5 days out still for some of them that could still move around. So we don't know exactly where this is going to go, but we know where it is right now. We're watching the new data coming in. Dr. Knabb has been working on that. Dr. Knabb, when it comes to what you're looking at right now, is there anything that's jumping out at you as being a sign that this is either getting more organized or it's not quite there yet? What's the new data showing you?
Well, we have a low that's centered over the Gulf of Mexico. So this is the beginning of the development process over water. And we've seen a lot of thunderstorms over water today. So, Mark, that's one indication that this is probably headed upward in terms of its overall organization. Today was just kind of day one over the Gulf. And I think the more that low gets over water, the more it taps into that Gulf of Mexico energy, the more it's going to develop and probably intensify later this week. Right now, Hurricane Center giving it an 8 out of 10 shot of becoming a depression or storm over the next 5 days, and most of those chances really are in the next 2 days. So by Thursday, I think we're going to have at least a depression on our hands, and it's somewhere in this general area. Okay, the farther east it develops, the sooner. If it takes a little longer, then maybe it'll become a depression farther west. But regardless, it's going to start producing weather in these coastal areas sooner than the end of this development area, which would be 5 days from now. So also keep in mind that because this is going to be developing close to land, the Hurricane Center does have the option, don't know if they'll invoke it, but if they feel like they need to issue advisories before it's a depression on a potential tropical cyclone because they want to put up a tropical storm watch for land areas, they could do that. This depends on whether or not they think the land threat is high enough in the next 2 days before it's a depression. But in any event, the system has a lot working in favor of it, unfortunately. In the atmosphere, you can already see upper-level high pressure starting to form. We got upper-level low here, one down here, and those are really just helping to enhance the outflow over this system. So the atmosphere doesn't appear to have anything in its hands to get over the Gulf to add wind shear and tear this apart, and the circulation is starting to get larger and dominate more of the eastern Gulf of Mexico. It's centered kind of in here, but you see the thunderstorms aren't persistent, and they aren't really well organized in space either. So it's got a little bit of baking to do. And here's the daytime heating. But tomorrow we'll see more thunderstorms over water, and this will eventually tap into this 85 to 90 degree water temperature in the Gulf of Mexico at the surface. And some of that warm water goes below the surface. So there's plenty of fuel. And the longer it stays over water, the more it will tap into that fuel and have time to develop and intensify. And look what the GFS model is doing today. It's a little different from yesterday. It stays over water a little bit longer, and it gets a little bit stronger than in yesterday's runs. This is assuming it stays over water all the way into Saturday, but it could become a fairly strong system if it does that. The European model has been kind of showing that for a few days. Now the models are getting a little bit better agreement, but they don't agree on exactly when it would come ashore. But regardless, this paints a scenario that could eventually have a wind and storm surge hazard to go with it, but we already know, regardless of what status it attains, it's going to be a big rain producer, not just at the coast, but inland as well. This is the European model's depiction. Look at how some portions of the northern Gulf Coast, at the coast and inland, could get more than a foot of rain over the next 7 days, and a lot of that could fall in the latter portion of the week or into the weekend. We might have to wait and get a little antsy as this lingers right off the coastline to see what's eventually going to fall. But today, look at the GFS is similar, Alex. So I'm really concerned about a life-threatening rain-induced flood event in addition to all the other hazards this might eventually pose.
Yeah, especially in this part of the country, they have been soaked. Places like Baton Rouge, just within a few weeks, they've had significant flooding problems.
Absolutely a big problem.
So we've got to watch where this is headed and obviously what's going to affect the steering of this system. We look at our forecast models and you can see that general westward trend that Dr. Knabb was talking about, and then, of course, portions of Mississippi or along the Mississippi-Texas state line. That would be an area we'd be watching this to eventually move inland. All thanks to our current setup. We've got this blocking high pressure that's going to prevent it from moving eastward, say into parts of the Big Bend of Florida. Our area of high pressure over the southwestern U.S. could help to guide this one westward, and we think that's the one that's really going to allow this one to slowly meander. But we've got to watch this dip in the jet stream. If that's able to grab onto this, we could see this move farther north, or more of a northerly turn than, say, a westerly turn as we get into the late part of the week. So again, a more northern track, perhaps even into southern Alabama, southern Mississippi, a possibility. Areas around New Orleans, a possibility, and then again, going farther west, say into a place like Houston. very much on the table. But what we do know is that heavy rain will begin as early as tomorrow and into Thursday morning, possible flash flooding along the Gulf Coast. Guess what? Thursday into Friday morning, Mark, we're watching a lot of the same communities for heavy rain and potential flooding issues, but it's not just the coast that we have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's when the storm is just getting organized, just kind of hugging the Gulf Coast. When this eventually does move inland, there is going to be a huge zone of inland flood potential. So much so that we've got the generic green on the map. It's been so soggy over the lower Mississippi Valley. The river is running extraordinarily high, still at extreme flooding in some of the gauges along the lower Mississippi. And so when you bring in a slow-moving tropical system on top of the high rivers, on top of the high soil moistures, there's going to be too much water for someone. And it could be far-reaching and far away from where this currently disorganized tropical entity eventually comes inland. Notice how wet the soils are across the center of the country. There's a little bit more bandwidth, southern Mississippi and to southern Alabama, but that'll get used up pretty quickly over the next couple of days where this storm is getting organized, and we'll have those kind of almost banding features already starting because the thunderstorms are going to be there. There's sea breeze fronts, there's the organizing tropical system, there's all this thunderstorm potential near the coast. And so that bandwidth goes away pretty quickly. Then you wind up with this huge surge of rain. This is the European model painting a very dangerous setup for New Orleans and points just west. USGFS has some big differences still. We definitely need to watch both of these models. There will be changes to both of them as we get closer. Alex.
Yeah, we can anticipate that. Inland flooding has a history of being one of the most destructive and deadly threats of these tropical systems. Last year we had Hurricane Florence setting more than 24 flood records, even though a lot of people had the perspective it's just a Category 1, but it was the rain that was the calling card. The year before that, Tropical Storm Cindy, it peaked with over 4 feet of storm surge, and that water inundated roads, beach erosion happened, and there was about $25 million in damage. So no slouch, even though, quote unquote, just a tropical storm. And then in 2016, not even a tropical storm, just a heavy rain event from a tropical-ish system that killed at least 13 people, damaged an estimated 146,000 homes. Dr. Knapp, this one was especially notable because this never even became a tropical depression, but still a big rainmaker. I think so many times people get caught up in the designation and the strength, and they forget about what the water can do.
And in a lot of these cases, a lot of the fatalities, just like we've seen here in the United States so far this year without depression storms or hurricanes, a lot of people dying in floods in their cars. We've lost 43 people that way this year and more than 65 people overall in floods this year. Water is a killer, and in tropical systems it has a history of doing that, sometimes in large numbers. And I wanted to highlight here a few of the flooding rain events associated with named storms that most of them, when they caused the heavy rainfall and flooding, weren't hurricanes. Even Florence and Harvey, when they dumped most of their rains that led to the devastating inland flooding, they were tropical storms that we see in the green here. And look at all these other systems. Isaac and Debbie, 2012, both caused tremendous heavy rainfall-induced flooding in Florida when they were centered over the Gulf of Mexico. And Mark, it is so important that people not get hung up on the status and focus on where the heavy rainfall could occur, perhaps far away from wherever the center of this thing is this week.
Yeah, absolutely. We know the Gulf of Mexico can create conditions that make storms form just offshore and then intensify pretty quickly. For example, in 2016, Hermine was a tropical depression on August 31st. Then, 2 days later was a Category 1 hurricane at landfall. Don't forget what happened with Harvey in 2017, a tropical depression to a Cat 4 landfall in, 2.5 days? So these are some really quickly spinning up storms where then suddenly not only do you have the rain factor, but the winds become a factor too. It's not out of the question that wind could be part of this story as well, Dr. Knapp. Yeah,
I don't want anybody to just assume that because it's not even a depression yet, that this system this week is always going to stay weak and I don't have to worry about wind and storm surge. No, watch this one carefully. Don't trust it, okay?
Yeah.
Because the Gulf of Mexico has a long history going way way earlier than these examples that are recent of having systems form in the Gulf and still having time to intensify quite a bit before landfall. I wanted to go back to Umberto 2007. This was a system, I remember being on the operations floor at the Hurricane Center, and when I left that afternoon, it was a broad, weak trough of low pressure, and the next day it was ramping up, and the next night it was a Cat 1 landfall. It was all less than a day. It's how quickly things can change when something is trying to get forming on your doorstep. And in Hermine, I was director of the Hurricane Center, and I remember talking to folks here at the Weather Channel at the time, and we were discussing how is it that we could have a hurricane watch up for a tropical depression. But that's because the signs were there that it could organize, and I wouldn't be shocked if we get a situation this week where we've got a tropical depression, but we've got tropical storm or maybe even hurricane watches up later this week if the system organizes soon and it is forecast to stay over water. Just be ready to act quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I remember working with you on air here for Harvey when it was going over the Yucatan. It completely lost all organization.
Not even a depression at that point.
It had nothing. It didn't even have a low-level swirl left. And then a few days later, we know what happened.
And remember that Harvey had two phases.
Yeah.
The strong wind and storm surge event as a Cat 4 landfall, and then as a tropical storm becoming a heavy rainfall event. And the systems that come ashore stronger, they last longer over land. So just be ready for anything this week and don't tune out.
It is possible that we could have a strong storm when all is said and done.